They were the mobile killing squads deployed by the SS inside of occupied countries during World War II, and it's believed that they executed well over 1 million people during the conflict. The Einsatzgruppen were under the direction of head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich, and they would follow the armed forces' advancements as the Wehrmacht rampaged east following Operation Barbarossa. They ruthlessly massacred and slaughtered thousands of people at a time, and still today many of their victims are undisturbed, their graves yet to be found, 85 years on from the Second World War. The Einsatzgruppen were known for their regimented and routine executions, and people knew what was coming for them when they arrived inside of different settlements. But even the head of the SS was known to have felt sick when he personally witnessed an execution by his death squads. But what was it like to have witnessed one of these mass shootings? It was truly harrowing. The Einsatzgruppen were formed with one intention in mind: to slaughter as many people who were deemed as enemies of the Third Reich and the Nazis, and those who were either resistors or were subjected to persecution. The slaughter began following the outbreak of World War II, as the Einsatzgruppen followed the German armies, and they were made up of SS, SD the security service, police and Gestapo officers, and they were led by different commanders. Initially, around 2,700 men in the group were tasked with murdering members of the Polish leadership and the intelligentsia, and Hitler had said that there must be no Polish leaders. Where Polish leaders exist, they must be killed, however harsh that sounds. 7 Einsatzgruppe battalions of around 500 men operated in Poland, and they received their orders direct from Reinhard Heydrich. They were also involved in rounding up people who were sent into ghettos in major cities. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941, the Einsatzgruppen's main assignment and task was to kill civilians, but those linked to the Communist Party, including commissars and Jewish civilians too. The method of execution was terrible. You may think that gunshot or firing squad seemed quick, but the process to the execution pit was prolonged, and often harrowing, as victims knew what was going to happen, and they also heard the gunshots of previous victims who had gone before. Inside of towns and cities, and even small settlements and villages, when the German army pushed through, the armed forces continued on, but then the Einsatzgruppen arrived. They often recruited local militiamen who were collaborating with the Nazis to help with the executions, but they gathered the people together in public squares or places. The people were then sorted. If they were targeted for execution, they could be gathered on trucks or marched to the edge of a settlement. This was where the executions usually took place. Sometimes they occurred inside of wooded areas where the crimes could be concealed by the trees. In other times, the death squads wanted people to see what was happening. The Einsatzgruppen then had their first victims begin to dig the pit. They did this with spades and whatever tools were available. In some cases, the SS utilised heavy machinery to dig the pits to make the execution process quicker. The pits were usually large, many metres wide and long, and also deep. After arriving at the execution site, victims were told to leave their belongings and valuables in a pile. The point of this was so that the SS and the Nazis could steal what was brought. People were told they were going to be moved elsewhere in Eastern Europe, so they brought with them their most valuable items, such as jewellery and wads of cash. This property was then sorted by the death squads and other officials, and of course some people stole and took whatever they could. After this they were told to undress, and they left their clothes in piles, and this was sorted too. Men were usually shot together, women were also shot together, some were even executed holding their children. They were marched over to the pits, and there were 2 methods of execution deployed, both using gunshot. The first was using a sole executioner. Often one soldier would patrol in the pit armed with his pistol, and he ordered the victims to lie down, often on the bodies of those who had gone before. Then the executioner placed his weapon against the back of the neck and took a shot, instantly killing using a Genickschuss, a neck shot. These executioners worked in shifts, and they would be rotated often and quickly. The other method used was a firing squad made up of many different executioners armed with rifles. The victims in this case were told to stand with their backs facing the executioners, who were stood on the edge of the pit with their weapons raised and ready. They then took the shot, executing victims in cold blood. One man who witnessed the Einsatzgruppen executions claimed that the people who had got off the lorries, men, women and children of all ages, had to undress upon the orders of an SS man who carried a riding or dog whip. They had to put their clothes on separate piles of shoes, top clothing and underclothing. I saw the heap of shoes that must have contained 800 to 1,000 pairs, great piles of clothes and undergarments. Without screaming or weeping, those people undressed, stood in family groups, kissed each other, said their farewells, and waited for a sign from another SS man who was stood near the pit, also with a whip in his hand. During the 15 minutes that I stood near the pit, I did not hear anyone complain or beg for mercy. I watched a family of about 8, a man and a woman, both about 50, with their children, aged about 1, 8 and 10, and 2 grown-up daughters of about 20 to 24. An old woman with snow-white hair was holding this 1-year-old child in her arms and singing and tickling it. The child was cooing with delight. The parents were looking on with tears in their eyes. The father was holding the hand of a boy about 10 and speaking to him softly. The boy was fighting his tears. The father pointed towards the sky, stroked the boy's head, and seemed to explain something to him. At that moment the SS man at the pit shouted something to his comrade. The latter counted off about 20 persons and instructed them to go behind the earth mound. The family I have described was amongst them. I will remember a girl, slim with black hair, who as she passed me pointed to herself and said 23 years old. I then walked round the mound and found myself confronted by a tremendous grave. People were closely wedged together and lying on top of each other so that only their heads were visible. Nearly all the blood running over their shoulders from their heads. Some of the shot people were still moving. Some lifted their arms and turned their heads to show that they were still alive. The pit was already 3/4 full. I estimate that it held about 1,000 people. I looked for the man who did the shooting. He was an SS man who sat on the edge of the narrow end of the pit, his feet dangling in it. He held an automatic pistol on his knees and was smoking a cigarette. The people, they were completely naked, went down some steps which were cut into the clay wall of the pit and clambered over the heads of those who were lying there to the place where the SS had directed them. They lay down in front of the dead and wounded. Some caressed the living and spoke to them in a low voice. Then I heard a series of shots. I looked into the pits and saw their bodies still twitched, although their heads lay motionless on top of other bodies before them. Blood ran from their necks. The Einsatzgruppen conducted large massacres as well. At Babi Yar in 2 days, 33,771 Jewish people were slaughtered in September 1941, and it's estimated that up to 150,000 were executed at the site of that ravine. One witness said of these executions that an immense crowd of people, impossible for me to count, was brought here. The line was endless, so was the automatic rifle fire and shots from a machine gun. When we went to bed at home, our heads were full with the sound of shooting. It's all impossible to forget. I remember a group of 4 or 5 girls who absolutely refused to undress. The Germans pulled on their clothing. Undress, they shrieked, and they refused. They attacked the Germans. We could hear. The Germans cursed them and shot them there, and then, fully dressed. They died with their clothes on. They were dragged to the ravine and thrown in. Others were docile and they didn't protest. I remember that evening, the clothing piled up. Coats, little souvenirs, it was all loaded into bins and hauled away. We could see the outlines of the bodies. At the end of the day they built a circular sand dike. In its centre we could see a black pool of blood and fat. A lake of black liquid. So many people had been killed. The wounded bled. You could see the blood through the sand. Later the Einsatzgruppen utilised gas fans as a psychological toll on the executioners was said to have been too much. They also drove people into these chambers of death. But all across occupied Europe, the Einsatzgruppen shot and massacred millions of people, and still today lots of their crimes remain deep underground. It was ruthless and savage slaughter, and at the end of the war, shockingly few people were ever brought to trial and were punished for their actions relating to the group. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.